Okay, we now move on to the Albion counter gambit. This is quite a dangerous gambit that black can try against d4 and c4. I thought I'd include it in this part of the DVD because it does start d4, d5, so really for the first part of the DVD I want to concentrate on this responses to black's d5 option and move 1. Now, I thought the best way to go over the Albion counter gambit would be just by demonstrating 2 games. And the first game is the game I played against Adam Ashton, and the second game also involves Adam Ashton with the black pieces. So I'm sorry, Adam, I have included 2 of your losses, but I think White's plan against your opening here worked quite well. So this is why, nothing personal. And it's quite a simple response I'm going to give. I'm not, as the Albin counter is not a main line, I'm keeping my philosophy. Main lines, I'm going to give aggressive options for White. If it's not the main line, I'm going to try to go for something which is simple, easy to remember, easy to learn, and something which is not too taxing, basically, that should offer you a small advantage or quite a pleasant position. And this is what I'm going for here. I'm not going for the main line. Let's just have a look at the Albion counter first of all, which is d4, d5, c4, and now the move e5. So e5, interesting move, the Albion counter gambit, and well, Morozevich basically made this quite popular, this move e5, when he first played it in a number of matches, and he got some very good victories with it. But that's Morozevich for you. You could probably make you know, the Grob very popular and have some great victories with the Grob because he's such an imaginative and great player. Now, generally the line after e5, the only way that White can really aim to get an advantage, a big advantage anyway, is by taking the gambit. Take the pawn on e5, don't be scared. And now black continues with d4 here. This is his plan of action, to use this d4 pawn as a magnet for an attack to gain space, and etc. This pawn is very useful on d4. Black generally plays stuff like knight to c6 next. Bishop to b4 check is something to watch out for, and black will often castle queenside at the right moment. I mean, the bishop on c8 often comes to f5. This is a good diagonal for it. This is in the main line, not the line I'm going to recommend. The main line is basically, I'll just show you, knight to f3, knight to c6, g3. And this has been a lot of theory on it. Generally, it is good for White, but you have to know a fair bit of theory. I'm not going to recommend this line, so let's not even go there. What I'm going to recommend after d4 is a simple solution, pawn to e4. And the reason I'm giving this line is that I just think I like the pawn structure, and it's White who generally gets the attacking chances in this position, not black. So you're turning the tables on your opponent, which is a very useful tool to use. And it's simple to learn. We just go e4, we go f4, we put our bishop on d3, our knight on f3, and we castle kingside. I mean, you can't get much easier than that, can it? f4, bishop d3, knight to f3. This is your simple plan. And often we return our pawn advantage in most positions to get the initiative. So let's have a look at 2 games in this line with e4, which I think demonstrate the possibilities better than anything else. So e4, black now develops with knight to c6. Obviously, this looks very logical, threatening to capture the pawn on e5, developing a piece. Now, the plan behind e4 is f4 to get this pawn formation, which is very nice and centre of the board. 2 main moves here now, which we're going to have a look at in our 2 games. Now, the first game is my game against Adam Ashton from the Isle of Man Congress. Unfortunately, this tournament doesn't go on anymore. It's a very popular and very nice tournament, and really quite a relaxing tournament in the Isle of Man. Really pity that sponsor has dropped off, but this is basically the trend for a lot of chess tournaments now. The sponsors are dying, unfortunately, so we need more sponsors out there. Chess is such a sponsorable game as well, with more people playing chess around the world than cricket, so if you're a sponsor out there, throw some money into the game. It's only going to give you good returns. But after f4, the first line we're going to look at is g5, and then after this, f6. These are 2 ways that black can try to get an edge. Now, one crazy man once played knight takes e5 against me here, with the idea again one check, but it's basically rubbish, so I'm not even going to go for that. Let's just have a look at my game against Adam Ashton with g5. Now, basic rule, if black goes g5, we're going to return the pawn by going f5. If black goes f6, we're going to return the pawn by going e6. These are the two basic rules. We're returning the pawn immediately to get the initiative and to keep a safe position without any risk. So g5, we return the pawn immediately by going f5. Black really has to take on e5, otherwise I'm going to go e6. So knight takes e5, and now knight to f3. So you might ask, well, how's this helped white? Well, the pawn on f5 is very useful. It stops black from getting his bishop on c8 to a good square. It gives us a nice wedge in black's position, which we can build an attack from. The pawn on g5 is a slight weakness for black, and it does create some holes around the king side. So I think generally white's structure is better than black's structure here. We just want to continue developing very quickly here with bishop d3 castles kingside. I think the game demonstrates it better than anything I can talk about. So knight takes f3 checks, what Adam played. Queen takes f3. And now bishop to d6. I might even consider e5 at the correct moment, but I'm going to go bishop d3, castles kingside, e5. Such a simple position to play. Again, this is why I like it. So Adam tried to get hold of the dark squares by playing bishop to d6, which looks fairly logical. Now I just develop. Bishop to d3. Queen to e7, again with the idea of getting hold of the e5 square, the dark squares. I just castled. Simple stuff. My opponent now went f6, and it looks like he's got complete domination of e5 now. But his king is still in the centre of the board. I have managed to castle. He has some weaknesses on this diagonal, the e8, h5 diagonal, and I just have the initiative here, which I've got to use quickly. So I found a nice idea now. Queen to h5 check. Obviously he doesn't want to move his king. Queen to f7. Now we've got to avoid exchanging queens here because we've got the initiative. If we exchange queens, then black is perfectly okay with his control of this e5 square. So now queen to e2 was the move I played, with the idea of breaking through with pawn to e5 at the correct moment. My opponent played knight to e7, hoping to get castled, but he never had time to castle because I played the aggressive c5. And this gives me two good moves that I can play next. I have the e5 break, and I also have bishop to c4 available for my pieces. Black's position collapsed very quickly after this. He went bishop takes c5, and now I went e5, busting him in the centre of the board. He hasn't got time to castle. I'm going to go e6 or take on f6 next. He can't castle really in these positions. I mean, bishop c4 is an option, but maybe I can go just e6. He's got to really try to develop, and well, he tried this with the move of bishop takes f5. But he's Adam quickly got a lost position here after I went rook takes f5. This is the simplest solution. Knight takes f5. Pawn to e6. Where does he move his queen? Well, he could try queen to g6 here, but I'm still going to win this knight with the aid of queen to g4, queen to f3. His position's collapsing, so he went queen to e7. Now I threw in a check first before capturing his knight. Queen h5 check, king to d8, bishop takes f5, and I have two pieces for the rook, which is generally very good. Black's king is in a lot of trouble. My light square bishop dominates the board, and the pawn on e6 gives me a winning position. So I've gained a winning position here by capturing this f5 square, getting two pieces. Okay, my opponent has a lot of pawns, but he has no coordination with his king and pieces. So let's just show the rest of the game just to see how it finished off. Pawn to a5 was played. Black wants to get his rook out via a6. I bring my piece on the queen side into the game. Knight to d2, rook to a6, knight to e4, d3 check, king to f1. My king's perfectly safe here. My knight on e4 dominates the board. King to c8, run away. Get another piece out, bishop d2, targeting the f6 square. Eventually, king to b8, bishop to c3, rook to f8, a3, useful little move, maybe stopping bishop to b4. My opponent's running out of possibilities. Bishop to d6. Last piece comes in the game, rook to d1, bishop to e5, so swap it off my dark squared bishop, but so what? Rook takes d3, bishop takes c3, and now rook to d7. You can see how my knight on e4 dominates his queen, not allowing it into the game. And the game finished, queen to e8, and now pawn to e7. And my opponent resigned here, because he's losing more material and losing the game. So, very simple way to play against the Albion counter. After d4, we're going to go e4. The idea of going f4. In this game, we saw my opponent try g5 on move 5. Against g5, we're going to play f5, simply returning the pawn, gaining space. We're very comfortable and easy to play position. In the next game, we'll have a look at black's other option, which is pawn to f6. I expect that pawn to f6 is a slightly better option for black, but again, we're going to return a pawn and get easy play. Okay, so let's now have a look at the second game, the Albion counter, and this was played in the year 2000 at Hastings Masters Tournament in England. We had Goff Stein with the white pieces and GM from Israel, I think, against Adam Ashton again with the black pieces. And I think after this game, Adam basically gave up playing the Albion counter because he lost 2 very quick games in this variation. So d4, d5, c4, and now the Albion counter, pawn to e5. So what we do, we capture this pawn, and after d4, we go e4. So not the main line, but a nice, safe and simple way to play. Knight to c6. Black attacks the pawn on e5. We defend it, pawn to f4. In the last game, we had a look at g5, f5. In this game, we're going to have a look at the move pawn to f6. And this is another way for black to try to gain active play. Now, if you're brave and you don't mind defending, you could capture this pawn on f6, but I think this is incredibly risky because black develops very quickly with knight takes f6 when his knight can come to g4 often. And throughout this DVD, I'm going for lines where white has the initiative, but black doesn't get the initiative. That's the key points of this DVD. I want to be the one pushing my opponent. I don't want my opponent pushing me. And if we've got the white pieces, we're the one who should be dictating the game. So in this position, I'm going to recommend we just go the move e6 here. This returns the pawn immediately, but it allows us free development and free quick development. Now, obviously, black has to take this pawn, so black does not want to allow white to play f5. So bishop takes e6. And the point being behind this and taken on f6 is that it's a lot harder for black to get his pieces developed now. This knight on g8 can't come to the f6 square because it's got a pawn on that square, so it's just really about gaining time by returning the pawn. And now we continue with our standard plan. Knight f3, bishop d3, castles kingside. So knight to f3. Black went queen to d7, so going for queenside castling. And now a useful little prophylactic move here, a3. Now, I say prophylactic because it stops any bishop b4 check, but it's also a prophylactic aggressive move, I'd say, because if black castled queenside, we can always go b4 and we start our pawn roll on the queen side. So it's a useful move, this a3. Often a useful move in this variation to play. Pawn to a5, so stopping b4. Bishop to d3. Adam developed with bishop to c5. And now white continues, castles kingside. Knight to e7, so black has to finish his development, but white now played a very interesting and strong plan here, which is actually similar to the last game we looked at. Pawn to f5. Now, always be a bit wary about giving away the e5 square, but black's king is in the centre, white's king is castled, so we can aim to open up the position. Bishop to f7, and now the pawn sacrifice line, e5. And this is a really nice move actually here. Very similar to the e5 we saw in the last game, just opening up the centre, giving us access mainly to the e4 square for our knight, knight to d2 to e4. And this leaves black on the serious defensive here. For example, black now played knight takes e5, white played knight takes e5, pawn takes e5, and now knight to d2. So white is the one who sacrificed the pawn, but he has massive compensation for this. Very good pawn on f5. This is very dangerous. Black never really castled kingside because of some f6 breaks. A monstrous square on e4 for our knight. Knight to e4 is coming. If black castles queenside, we always go b4, attack him over there. Our king is perfectly safe, and black's pieces are lacking good squares. And the game actually only lasted another 10 moves here. It went knight to c6, knight to e4, forcing this bishop away. Bishop to e7. Queen to e1 was now played. Now this is a useful move. The queen might want to come over to g3 if black castles on the king side. Also, we're putting a little bit of pressure on the a5 square, and we're lining up against the king. Black is pretty helpless here. Bishop to f6. Now there's probably other possibilities to what white played, but white thought, why don't I go g4? And indeed, why not? Because if we can go g5, black is pushed back yet again, and these pawns can become very good assets. And the other thing is, the king is perfectly safe here because the position is blocked. So we can push our kingside pawns. Don't push your kingside pawns if the position's open, generally, because black will, or your opponent might be able to get behind the pawns and attack you. Black now played h6, which was met by h4. Just going a route 1 tactic. Black thought he had to get his king out of dodge, so he castled queenside. And now, as soon as he castled queenside, white attacks on the other side of the board. b4, queen to e7, and we just motored on forwards. Pawn to b5. The knight has to move at some point. Knight to b8, queen takes a5. And black lost very quickly from this point. Bishop takes h4. Probably should have played this earlier, but then he had to contend with some s6 move. And now queen to a7. It's clear whose king is in more danger. Bishop to g5. Knight to c5. Only one way to stop. Queen takes b7. Pawn to c6. And now a nice little move. Pawn to s6. This is a very nice way to win the game. Lovely little tactic. If black takes on s6, with, let's say, pawn takes s6, we go bishop to f5 check. And after a piece moves to d7, queen takes b7 is going to be mate in most positions. So this f6 decides the game. Black played queen c7, but then he resigned because he probably realised that white can just go simply pawn to b6 here, and he's going to lose his queen. So that basically sums up this variation. We don't need to spend too much time on it. So the quick recap: if your opponent plays e5, you take on e5, and after d4, you play e4 with the idea of returning the pawn for simple, quick development. If your opponent plays f6 on move 5, you play e6, as in this game. If your opponent plays g5 on move 5, you play f5. Both times returning the pawn to gain quick, speedy development to gain the initiative. And that's all you need to know in this variation.